Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. I'm so excited that you're here this week because I wanted to kind of go back to the basics a little bit. A lot of people are flooding in on my Instagram at Jessica Ash Wellness and asking all types of questions. And I think that there's some confusion on what pro-metabolic eating actually is. And because it's gaining more and more traction, a bunch of people are treating it like it's the newest diet and it's being treated like a diet. And the problem is it's not a diet. It's not even a way of eating. It's a way of living. And today I want to dive into that. Welcome back to the channel. My name is Jessica Ash, for those of you who are new, and I'm a functional and clinical nutritionist who specializes in hormones and metabolism. And I just really love to nerd out on all things nutrition and metabolism. So I am so glad that you're here and you want to learn a little bit more about your biology and your biochemistry. And it's time to take a deep dive into what pro-metabolic is and what pro-metabolic isn't. So a lot of people are flooding into this space, this pro-metabolic space, and they're starting to follow a bunch of pro-metabolic influencers like me and some other people, and they're just diving in, feet first, jumping in, doing all the things. And then they're finding that they're maybe gaining some weight, they're not feeling as great, and they kind of just say this didn't work for me, or it's not working for me, or I'm getting all these issues and it's not working for me. And I like to just bring up a few points because I think this is a really important topic to talk about. I get that health journeys can be frustrating, especially when you're trying something new and you are wanting it to work and it makes so much sense and all you want it to, and you see it working for all of these other people and you just want it to work for you. And when it's not working for you and you feel like it's working for everyone in the world but you, it can be really frustrating, and I totally get it. So I actually want to discuss this topic because I do think there are some points that need to be made that people are just not talking about in this space. And it's just really important, especially if you are new, and especially if you're treating pro-metabolic like it's the new fad diet. So before we dive into what pro-metabolic eating is, let's actually talk about what it isn't. So it's not actually a diet that's focused and centered on carbs. I think people just think that it is because when they look at pro-metabolic influencers and they're eating carbs and they haven't been eating carbs for a while, they're just like, OMG, carbs, hyper focus on the carbs. It's actually not about carbs. We'll dive into that a little bit more, or we'll dig into that a little bit more in a second. It's also not a diet that contains a bunch of processed and refined carbs. So I know this kind of emphasizes the last point, but I think people again are when they're coming from not eating carbs and then they go to eating carbs, they just hyper focus on the fact that oh, this person eats refined carbs. Even if the majority of their diet is not refined carbs, they just are oh my gosh, it's all about the refined carbs. It's also not a diet where you pound dairy and orange juice like it's going out of style. I know you might see people consuming orange juice in the context of a nutrient-dense diet, or maybe a lot of dairy compared to where you're coming from, but just because these are a part of their whole nutrient-dense diet in context doesn't mean it's the majority of their diet. It's also not a diet where you constantly graze all day long. I think people think that because people are focusing on manually balancing their blood sugar and eating every 3 to 4 hours, that they're just eating all day and just grazing constantly. No, that's not it either. And it's definitely not a diet that's going to magically fix all your issues overnight. So a lot of people are coming in new to this and they're seeing testimonials, and they're seeing the testimonials of maybe influencers in this space, and they're just oh my gosh, finally I've arrived, and they again dive head first into everything, and then they get really frustrated when it's 2 months later and they're oh my gosh, I'm not fixed, why? And you have to remember, it's not a diet that fixes things overnight, especially issues that have taken years and years to develop because of internal imbalances. And if you didn't notice, a common theme to all of those things that pro-metabolic eating is not is it's not a diet. I think I want to emphasize that 1,000 times. It is not a diet. And a lot of people are treating it like such, and that's why they're hitting a wall and getting really frustrated. So first and foremost, it's not a diet. And second of all, the things I just mentioned are not inherently bad. They just are not what pro-metabolic eating is. And I think that a lot of people think are the foundational parts of this style of eating and living. So now that we went over what pro-metabolic eating is not, let's talk about what pro-metabolic eating actually is. And to actually understand what it is, we need to go over what it means. So pro-metabolic is simply pro meaning for, and metabolic meaning metabolism. So simply, people are eating and living in a way that supports and nurtures their cellular metabolism, which literally just means our cells' use of energy. And most of us are coming into this style of living and eating with very, very imbalanced metabolisms or even trashed metabolisms, whether that's from our health history or supplements that we've taken in the past or really restrictive diets that we've done in the past. And so our goal over the course of our journey is to bring back our metabolism to optimal function. And remember, if we've gotten to this place, like it's taken years and years to get to a place, it's gonna take years and years to get out of a place. It doesn't just go from like great and optimally functioning to horrible to then just like automatically just going back to optimal function. We need to remember that. How long did it take for us to get here? It's gonna take us some time to reverse damage that has been done. And because we can only move forward and not erase the past, it's just a one foot in front of the other type of journey. There are steps and there are ups and downs and bumps and lumps to the journey, and that's just a part of how the body functions. So really it's about taking the steps to get back to an optimal metabolism and really welcoming the bumps along the way. And then from a mental side of things, we need to remember that a lot of us are bringing our old baggage from our restrictive days of restrictive dieting. We're looking at foods as good and bad oftentimes, or allowed and not allowed. And we also are often looking at our body as kind of the enemy or as a thing that we need to trick or manipulate, instead of seeing it as this highly intelligent creation that we can trust to let us know what it needs. It constantly is giving us feedback. So it's just really important to understand that oftentimes if we've been stuck in these very restrictive diets where we just are constantly restricting foods and constantly focusing on what we can eat and what we can't eat and pushing our body and never missing a Monday, we have gotten ourselves really tied up in knots mentally as well around food and also our body. And those are things that we have to unlearn. And we're gonna bring that baggage in. It's just a matter of fact. But as we start to work to heal our metabolism, we're going to also really have to work to heal our mindset as well. And that kind of stuff really goes hand in hand. They will come with one another. And I have also noticed this phenomenon where because people have tried so many different things and because some stuff has worked to a point and then doesn't work anymore, and then they come into this pro-metabolic space and everything makes so much common sense to them. It's like their world is illuminated and all of a sudden all their hormonal issues and metabolic issues are making so much sense that again, we just kind of dive in and we are looking at other influencers in the space that are doing so successful in this pro-metabolic way of life. And then when we're maybe not as successful within the first couple months, we just end up in this pile of frustration. So this is why the next couple of YouTube videos, I'm going to be going over different things like insulin resistance and finding your carb tolerance, talking about weight fluctuations, what's normal, what to look for, introducing pro-metabolic way of living or troubleshooting if you have already implemented pro-metabolic principles and you're really struggling or feeling like it's not working for you. And so I can't really wait for the next couple of weeks because these are questions that often get asked on my social media, and it's just really nice to be able to dig into these topics a little bit deeper to kind of give you guys some things to think about. And I think that those videos will be really illuminating. But in the meantime, I do want to give you 3 things that pro-metabolic eating and living is. So what actually is pro-metabolic or eating pro-metabolic? So the first thing it is it's a complete focus on how to lower internal or cellular stress or metabolic stress using food as your main tool. So I think that's really important. It's about lowering stress, actively working to lower internal stress using food or strategized nutrition as your main tool. And looking at it this way, you'll probably realize that this is going to look a little different for everyone, and it's also going to be very largely dependent on where people are coming from. So for example, somebody who's maybe eating one meal a day and running from the minute that they wake up all the way to 2 p.m. on just black coffee alone, that person is probably going to need to start in a little bit of a different place than somebody who maybe has already eating like 5 meals a day and they're just like maybe not feeling like it's working for them. So I think it's really important to understand that this is going to look, first of all, look different for everybody. And second of all, it's really going to be largely dependent on where you're coming from. And everyone has a different story. So somebody that has been living in a stressed out state for 15 years is probably going to have a very different journey than somebody who has maybe had a different type of stress for a shorter period of time or something like that. And so I think it's really important to acknowledge that pro-metabolic eating is not necessarily hyper focused on the types of food. It's actually more about your habits surrounding food, how you pair food together, finding that right balance of carbs, fats, and proteins, your good macronutrient balance that really helps optimize and make you feel good. It's about eating regularly and consistently to really manually balance blood sugar and create this environment of safety within the body so the body knows what to expect and knows it's getting the raw materials and the fuel it needs on a regular and consistent basis. And it's really about not going so long in between meals that we're really forcing stress on the liver to create glucose, obviously to enter the bloodstream to fuel the cells, which is the process called gluconeogenesis. And gluconeogenesis actually requires 2 catabolic hormones. And so catabolic literally just means like breakdown. I always say like catabolic, think cannibalism almost, like you break down your body in order to do something else. And so a lot of people, what they don't realize is when they're going too long without eating or they're on these extremely low carb diets, they're forcing their liver to make glucose by breaking themselves down, their own tissues, and turning them into glucose. That's not what we want to do. That's an incredibly stressful internal environment, and that is not going to be equal to amazing metabolic function over time. So that's really that first overarching first goal of pro-metabolic eating. It's to really just lower stress internally on the body that we may not even know we're causing with our habits, but we are. Now, the second thing about pro-metabolic eating is it's not actually about avoiding a bunch of foods. It's actually about focusing on the foods that are the most bang for our buck in the sense of nutrients, that provide us the most nutrient-dense nutrition, that's easy to break down, assimilate, and absorb, that provides our body with the energy and the nutrients it needs very quickly to replenish what we have actually lost over time or throughout our periods of life where we were very, very stressed out. Or all the while, if we've had this internal stress for so long, we've been depleting ourselves of nutrients. So that's an important thing to remember, is it's not actually about avoiding foods, it's about focusing on getting the right types of foods that give us what we need very quickly. And those foods will naturally crowd out the foods that maybe are not working for us as well or are not going to provide us a whole abundance of what we need. Does it mean those foods are bad, those ones that we're kind of crowding out? No. I mean, maybe some of those foods that you were previously eating a lot of, like nuts and seeds, for example, just really don't work for you anymore. And you've learned, I don't even like them. I don't even want to eat them ever again. But it's important for the people who maybe do enjoy those foods or crave those foods especially to not go out of their way to just avoid them because they're not pro-metabolic. It's more about saying okay, I eat them when I crave them. I eat the best quality I can find that's processed in the proper way. But I'm still focusing on an overall or overarching nutrient-dense diet that includes the foods that I need to thrive. And again, this will really all be very individual. You might be able to include foods or thrive on foods that somebody else doesn't do very well on, and vice versa. And that's where the comparison game can really mess you up mentally, because you're gonna kind of be like, oh wait, I think I'm doing something wrong, or they're doing something wrong. And in reality, neither of you are doing anything wrong. You are just listening to your body and doing what works for you, which is the most important thing. It's actually about being able to get the most variety in your diet while still thriving. And some people are not able to get as much variety because they just don't do well with certain foods, and that's okay. We still want to focus on just doing what we need to do to thrive, but it is actually about the more variety, the better. And it's really, truly about becoming so in tune with your body that you're able to really listen in and use its feedback to provide it with what it needs. And focus on those things that are making you feel so good day in and day out, and not really seeing food as good or bad or off limits any longer, but really just seeing food for what it is, like subjective. It either, makes you feel good or it doesn't make you feel good. And there might be some foods in between that are just neutral. And if you're still kind of confused about what it means to feel good or what you're looking for when you're, trying to find what foods work for you, make sure you check out my free metabolism check-in training. It'll be linked down in the description box below. It's a completely free guide that includes also a video training that talks about temperatures and pulses and all your metabolic markers that you can really tune into to see what's working and what's not working. And then the third and final point I want to make about pro-metabolic eating is that it's actually not just a way of eating, but it's a way of living. And it's about living with that awareness of what is possibly stressful or depleting, which is what stress really is, what's actually depleting on the body, and how to balance that with replenishment. So I like to use this bank account analogy that I've used before many times, and I kind of call it your health savings account. And so every time that we implement a habit that supports or honors or nourishes our body, like a good meal or a mineral supplement or a good night's sleep or whatever you want to include there, it adds to our health savings account. And then when we do things that require nutrients and fuel, whether that's a good stressor like exercise or maybe a bad stressor like a really stressful day, that's going to pull from that savings account. And we want to actually be putting more into the savings account than we're pulling out. And the minute that we start pulling out more than we're putting back in is the minute that we start to really feel horrible. And that's when our hormones start to imbalance. And so we have to remember to eat and live in a way that's adding more to our cup or more to our bank account than taking away or emptying our cup. And that's an important way to see nutrients and fuel and stressors, is just because a stressor is good or fun for us doesn't mean it doesn't pull nutrients and fuel. And so we want to be eating and living in a way that really helps our body meet the demands that we place upon it. That's really it. We want to be able to do all these things and thrive in life. That's fine. If we want to put a lot of demand on this vehicle, that's great. But we don't drive a Ferrari around on empty. We don't drive a Ferrari around with no spark plugs and that has gone way past the oil change, because at any point it's just going to break down. It's not reliable. And it's a similar situation. We want to be replenishing ourselves. We want to be running on full. We want to be completely and fully nourished. And that is the whole point of pro-metabolic eating or pro-metabolic living. Is it's not really just a way of eating. It's a way of living with awareness on your stressors. If something's going to pull from you, it doesn't mean it's bad. It doesn't mean you're going to be able to avoid it or you want to avoid it. It just means you need to be able to provide the proper balance, the proper recovery from that stressor. And that recovery might be rest, it might be sleep, it might be sunlight, it might be food and fuel and making sure you're nourished through the whole process. But we want to be living with awareness, because at the end of the day, you can't completely get rid of stress. It's impossible. Absolutely impossible. But living with awareness surrounding your stress and knowing how to support your body through the stress is the whole point. And yeah, if we can prioritize getting rid of some stressors or reducing some stressors, that's great, that's awesome. But some stressors just cannot be avoided. And that's where living in a pro-metabolic way, or a way that we're supporting our metabolism through these stressors, is of utmost importance. So I hope I kind of broke down some myths that maybe you had in your head regarding pro-metabolic eating, especially if you are still treating it as it's a diet or this list of like good and bad foods. I hope I reminded you that it's about much more than that, and it's important to focus on the right things. And make sure you're paying attention to the next couple of videos, because we're going to be breaking down more of like the in detail stuff around carbs and insulin resistance and all the questions that you guys have been asking these days on social media, and kind of your troubleshooting questions. And we'll definitely be breaking those down much more into detail. And remember that this is just an intro to pro-metabolic eating, which is why I created a whole course on it. I'm very passionate about it because I think it is a way that we can truly live our lives well, and that's why Fully Nourished exists. Fully Nourished is my online course that is the full blueprint to implementing pro-metabolic eating in a sustainable way, and in a way that's not overwhelming or super restrictive. And we go and dive into all of the things that can drive internal stress and how to eat and live in a way that lowers that stress. All right, guys, thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you in the next video.